Okay, well, let's get started. I'm Kimberly Doris, Executive Director of the Graves' Disease and Thyroid Foundation. I'd like to welcome you to Navigating Your Path, Living and Working with Chronic Autoimmune Disease. With Graves' disease and Hashimoto's thyroiditis, symptoms that can be especially challenging at work can range from fatigue to concentration issues to body temperature regulation, and even symptoms similar to those of depression or anxiety disorder. If you add thyroid eye disease in the mix, symptoms like dry eye, double vision, and eye pain can make routine tasks like using a computer or driving a car or even attending a Zoom meeting like this more difficult. So I'm really excited about this program, which has been produced in collaboration between GDATF, Immunovant, and Career and Chronic by Michelle Irving to help give you a framework for thinking strategically about your work and career. A couple of notes before we dig into this important topic. First, if you'd like to ask a question, please type it in the Q&A feature instead of using the raised hand, which will hopefully allow us to answer as many questions as we can during our time together. Also, we are recording this program and we will post it in the next few days on our website at gdatf.org, on our YouTube channel, and also on our social media sites. And I will drop all of that contact info in the chat. So with that, I'll turn the program over to JB Smalley, who is Head of Patient Advocacy at Immunovant. And a huge thanks to JB and Michelle for helping bring this program to our community.
Thank you so much, Kimberly. Great to be here. And oh, can you go back one? Perfect, because I just want to make sure that I also thank you as well, Kimberly, and the Graves' Disease and Thyroid Foundation for partnering with us to bring this important webinar to the community. And we appreciate all the work that you do to support folks who are living with thyroid conditions and autoimmune disease as well. And we also really appreciate all the input we've had from your community over the years. So with thanks for all of you for being here, I'll take my next slide, please. So I'll just quickly introduce Immunovant. For those of you who are not familiar with Immunovant, we're a clinical stage immunology company, and our vision is enabling normal lives for people with autoimmune disease. And the way that we're doing that is by developing targeted therapies that are designed to address your complex and variable needs. And you can learn more about Immunovant at immunovant.com or by visiting our corporate LinkedIn page as well. I'll take my next slide, please. So just a few words about AIM, which stands for Advocacy in Motion. This is a skill building program that's designed for US-based patient advocacy and professional organizations. And our goal is to support individuals living with autoimmune disease by providing educational, empowering content via live sessions and trainings. And at the end of this webinar, I just want to prepare you, you're going to have a QR code. So please have your telephones ready. You'll have an opportunity to take a very quick 5-question survey. And that survey is very important to us. Number one, it helps us understand if the content that we're creating for you is helpful. So we want you to evaluate the content. We also want to give you an opportunity to suggest other subjects that we should consider. And when I have this data, it helps me advocate internally to create more AIM programs for you all and to ensure that the programs we're creating meet your needs. So please take a moment to take our survey when you see the QR code before we close the program. I'll take my next slide, please. So our goal today is to help you to learn how to confidently integrate your professional ambitions as well as your health. And we'll do that through 3 objectives. Number one, Michelle will be reviewing the typical journey for people managing career and autoimmune disease. Second, you'll learn strategies to navigate each stage in an empowered way. And finally, hear collective learnings from people who have been there, such as Kimberly. So I'll take my next slide. And with that, I'll introduce today's expert. Welcome, Michelle. Michelle is the founder of Career and Chronic. She is a speaker and an executive coach. She also has 18 years of lived experience. She herself has autoimmune disease and has had quite a bit of experience launching a very successful career. She's a pioneer in chronic illness and leadership and very well known for her approach to integrating career and chronic health conditions. A fun fact is that she was also a digital nomad across Europe. So, with that, Michelle, I'd like to pass over the program to you. And thank you so much for leading today's training.
Thank you so much, JB. So, to welcome you all to this work, you can hear from my accent that I'm an Aussie. I'm very familiar with the US, and a lot of women I work with work in the US across a whole range of conditions, whether it's nursing all the way through to, say, working with NATO. So, the work that we're going to talk about today is really how it is my experience, it is my belief, and it's actually borne out through all of the work that we do, that chronic illness really does lead you to authentic leadership. And that's really the crux of the conversation that we're going to move through. So why? Why does it naturally lead to authentic leadership? Well, many professionals living with chronic illness really find that you've no longer got the bandwidth for holding up so much performing wellness under the pressure of being at work. And you must prioritize what is genuinely true for you as well as what is sustainable. So, that in itself means that you're learning to lead from the inside into the world and take that reference from what is within capacity and what does work for you in your body and really move from that over external expectations. Now, I know that in certainly a corporate environment or lots of, if you're on your feet all day, we're not talking about that you're doing whatever you want, whenever you want, at any time. What we're really talking about is that you are navigating this in a way that does work for you and that you do have to hone in on what that is. And so as we move through the rest of the presentation, I'll show you then how at every stage this does build your authentic leadership. Whether you want to be a leader or not, this is really about you leading yourself. So the first thing we want to talk about is how this is an inside job. And the key thing about that is that this is about your capacity, your talents, your expertise, your professional resources. These are yours. Nobody else owns these resources. And you have to be accountable with yourself for how you spend those resources, how you spend your time and your capacity, but also how you spend your analytical skills or your creative skills. And all of that awareness of how you use those skills comes from inside. The second thing about this is that as you work with that process with yourself and get clarity on that, it gives you much more ground to then have the conversations about what you are sharing with who and about how the work can get done and what the optimal way for that work is with you and your body. And so it really starts with this deeper knowledge and deeper learning from you about really being, robustly, proudly, beautifully accountable for the depth of your skills and then how those skills get shared. And so the question is, once you have a feeling about that, and we'll talk it through as we go through the map, the question is, well, that's great. I've worked out sort of what my skills are and how this works with my capacity, but I'm in a job, so what do I do? Or I'm not in a job and I've had to off ramp from work, what do I do? And that's what this presentation is really about. So what we have here for you is the career and chronic illness map, and there are really 5 stages of navigating your career with a chronic condition. This is not linear. It's just in a line so that we can talk about the stages, but you might be in one stage and never visit the other stages, or you might go through all of the stages. Just think of it as maybe a bit more round, just because to represent it, we're going to talk through how this could lead. So the first stage is off-ramping, which might be where you're on medical leave or burnout, or you've resigned or taken extended leave from work. And that's really where your condition and symptoms might have really flared up, and you are then really your primary focus, primary job is your health at that point in time. The second stage is on-ramping. You might be returning to the role you had. You might be applying for a new job, and you might even be, a new job within the organization you were in, but that has been shuffled around. The new is the stage that we often skip over when we think about returning to work, even if it's 3 days and you've been off on a procedure or you've changed medication. There are times where we think, well, we should go from having symptoms, getting some sort of management of them, all the way back to having full capacity. And we skip the part where you have to move through the new. And the new is that if you've changed medication, that's new. That's new for you, that's new for your body, and it actually means it's new for you at work because you're working out what to do. You might also move from on-ramping into working with new people. You might have an adjustment in identity. You might have an adjustment in your working arrangements. I am going to go through all of these in much more detail. At this point, we're sharing with you the overview of the map so you can have a feel for these stages. The next stage is where we spend 80% of our time with a chronic condition, which is test and redesign. And this is where you're at work, whether it's part-time or full-time or whatever your arrangements are, and your focus is seeking stability, and then you're negotiating with yourself and potentially with others. Okay, what works? How does it work? Does it work this way? Does it work that way? What should this look like? And that will flex over the period of your condition and over the period of treatment and over the period of your career. All of this, as you move through, leads to the final stage, which is authentic leadership. And one of the things that the authentic leadership leads you into is that you might start in your experience feeling like you're the sick person and you don't want to be the sick person at work. And you're trying to manage your career and how that works for you. As we move through each of these stages, it builds for you a professional skill set, and that will lead you into a new biography. And it will be that you may or may not share that you have a chronic condition, but the depth of the skills that you have built through navigating this also become part of your professional biography in the ways that you might talk about skill sets. It also means in authentic leadership that you do have really robust, healthy professional boundaries, and that you might move into your career of choice. If you're in a role through all of this that really causes you to refine in and hone down into what is the best use of you and your capacity in the world. So this is the framework that we're now going to move through, and I'm going to talk about what is helpful at each of these stages. Okay, so when you're off-ramping, what we often do in this stage is it has huge implications, as you may have experienced. It has implications around your family relationships, it has implications professionally, it has implications financially. And I know that Kimberly will also share in the chat and at the end about some resources that will cover off this specifically for your context. And I want to remind you in this moment, which I didn't share with you, is everything I'm sharing with you in this focus is about the 5 stages of the map and what it looks like. I'm not a legal professional, nor am I, an expert in all of the different legislation across the US in all of the different states. There is a variety of legislation and conditions and regulations that may apply to you. For all of those things, absolutely seek professional advice for your circumstances. As we move through the map, what we're really talking about is how to navigate this outside of some of those things. But in the off-ramp stage, you would absolutely be looking into what your benefits are, what your legal standing is, and any regulations for you with the company or the state. So the off-ramp piece is really where you are very focused on your health, and it's often the place, because of all of the pressures we've just talked about, is that you're sitting there working out, okay, how do I get perfectly well and how do I get completely back to work? And you're trying to map your professional life from this stage. This stage is really not for that piece as much as you want to do it, but what happens in this stage is really informative and useful for that stage of mapping out the next piece, which really comes with the on-ramping and the new, and then of course test and redesign. In this phase, it's really a great time to get clean and clear, sifting and sorting what you did like about working, what work really takes energy that nourishes you, and what is draining you. It's also to look at this stage as a cocoon where you're stripping out anything that's unnecessary and really focusing on what helps here. Sometimes what helps here, particularly if you're bed-based throughout this period of time, for me, just working that out was what helps here is to have water by my side table. What helps here is somebody getting my groceries or taking me to appointments. What helps here is getting clear who can help me here that is sustainable for me. And if you have some people that really can be helpful practically, but may not be super helpful emotionally sometimes, then in this stage, it's about super practical people get super practical things to help you, but they don't get access to the emotional journey that you're in because that's reserved for the people who can support you emotionally. And so this sifting and sorting becomes part of the skill that happens in the off-ramp. And as that progresses through the inside work, it will naturally lead you to the next transition, which is where you will start to look at on-ramping back to work. Now, I want to talk about this really cleanly for you because it's obviously not just lockstep and it's easy and now we're in the on-ramp stage and off we go. A lot of when you're considering returning to work, some people use this time to test capacity to work out what really is within the realm that works for them and their bodies. You might start volunteering. You might start doing a little bit of work, but it may not be in the public professional space in which you were previously in. The on-ramping is to really start to refine and define what capacity you have at this point and a bit of test and design before you might look to applying for the jobs and a full return to work. You might also be starting to negotiate returning to a previous role. In this phase, what helps here is to look at any information that you received internally from yourself in the off-ramp stage and start to work up a criteria for what is sustainable for you as you now look to working again. And that sustainability can include what I like to think of as the circle of wellness. So what we have when we are looking at our capacity is we either look at ourselves as we have to be fully functional, pushing through, doing everything, or we're crashed. And we will often run our capacity right up to the edge till we go over the cliff with our capacity, and it's no longer physically possible. So with that frame, it's either you've got capacity or you don't, and that is a lot of mental and emotional pressure. Instead, we do what I call your circle of wellness. Your circle of wellness has your baseline capacity, which is in contraction, and then your optimal capacity, which is at your most expanded capacity. And you will work between these two capacities, contracted and expanded. When you know what your capacity is in both your contraction and your optimal expanded, that will give you a lot of data for working out what works for you. So when you think about this, you can do it not just around physical capacity, but around mental capacity. Are you better in the mornings? Are you better in the evenings? You can do it around your creativity, your analytical skills, your clinical skills, say if you're in nursing. When are those skills really available for you at a baseline capacity? And then when are they really available at its most expanded capacity? What this gives you is something to actually track your much more than just physical capacity and it all being in your head and you don't really know. It gives you a way to map yourself. Then, as you're interviewing or returning to work, you might start to think about, well, what does this look like at baseline capacity? Because you already know the evidence is in. If you set this and the expectation at your optimal capacity, you're just really ready to ramp up and go over the cliff again. If you set it at your baseline and then can flex into optimal, what that does is give you more space, more compassion, and more really breathing for you to actually navigate this mentally and emotionally as well as physically. It also means that you can start to set expectations from the base and then expand out. So when you're in the on-ramping stage, this is an excellent time to just map this gently for yourself from where you are at this time. This skill of the circle of wellness will serve you in every stage, and it's something I use all day, every day, ongoing in my life. I designed it when I was in this stage, and it is the way that has made life so much easier. So once you move through the on-ramp stage, you move into the new. Now, one of the things about the new is that even if it's the same job and the same people, you are still navigating it from on-ramping in, or if you change jobs, do see it as the new. And the reason is often, in adulthood, we forget that learning something new takes energy. It actually takes time to learn something new. So in this phase, it's a place where you can have a lot more compassion for yourself if you frame it and understand that literally you are doing something new. And it stops the overwhelm from taking over in any spiral of worry about why haven't I worked this out again? I used to be able to do this all the time. See it as the new. And that gives you space to think about it as a new routine. And it gives you space to think about the adjusted identity. Now, identity is something that really gets challenged when we're living with chronic illness and working. And part of that's because we have this story of illness that is a fantasy for all of us with a chronic condition. And that goes, you get sick, you might get a little sicker, you get an easy diagnosis fast, you get treatment, return to full health. And most HR systems, most companies are all built around that model of illness. So the identity really latches on to beautiful, robust marathon capacity health. That doesn't work for us. And so the adjustment in identity that I want to share with you is to think about this as an authentic leadership skill, and that you are learning how to navigate something that takes a lot of grit, a lot of complexity, some vulnerability in the process, and you are leading yourself through. You will be, if you work with that circle of wellness process, also be leading others in how you speak about what your capacity is and mapping where you are going. This takes it out of it being so much personal. Thinking about it is you're navigating a medical condition. That's what you're navigating. It's not a moral failing, it's a medical condition. And so as that starts to seep and move into what you're thinking as you have a relationship with yourself where you're building confidence en route with these discussions, and the more times that you come back to it and move in the new, the more skill you will have. All of this leads to the next stage, test and redesign. So 80% of our time will be spent here. This is not news to you. What we're doing in testing and redesigning is really seeking stability. We're looking to consolidate what the capacity is, and can you see how that baseline and expanded capacity that may fluctuate in a day, may fluctuate in a week, a month, across a year, that really comes into play in the test and redesign process. It's also the case that you will decide who you share with. That may be other leaders around you, it may be managers, it may be teammates. It also is important to remember that disclosure is not a one-time event. You get to decide what you share in the way that works for you in visibility if you share it all. The other thing that's helpful to think about in disclosing is to separate what the disclosure is about the health condition from the disclosure about the capacity, just to give yourself some space. When you're sharing about the capacity, bring it from the what I can do. Don't start with the apology of what I can't do. And it's actually super logical why we do this. When you come in with, I can do this in this way, in this framework, at this time, whatever it is, then the other person has something to work with. It's like, oh, okay, we can do this in this way, in this process. When we start with what I can't do, then the other person's trying to work out what you can do. That's what they want to know. They actually want to know what you can do. And so come to that conversation with what you can do. The third piece in that is to look at this as professional boundaries, and you are accountable again for your resources, your creativity, your energy, your time, your capacity. So hold that as a healthy professional boundary with people from what I can do. As you work through that, you will gain more and more nuance. The other thing is, as your confidence builds en route, it will start to drop down some of the mental and emotional pressure. And what that does is actually give you more capacity, even if nothing physically changes, because the confidence itself has an energy to it. You will continue in capacity clarity about navigating that, but you'll also start to see how the creativity of just working out with a chronic condition, how to do something that you've adapted, how that level of creativity can look for more easeful ways for you to do the work. And a lot of what we have in our culture is a focus on hard work, and that teaches our mind and our emotions to look for the hard path. I'm going to challenge this and say, if you start to look at what is the more easeful way for the work to get done, it's not that you're not doing the work, we're just looking for the more easeful way to do it. then that in itself can redirect your energy into what I can do, because I can do it in a more easeful way this way. And you don't have to tell anybody that you're doing that. This then leads to authentic leadership. And one of the things that happens when you're navigating a chronic condition and looking at your work pathway or career pathway is you start to really think, what is truly important to me and what is the best use of my skills and my capacity. And that leads you to a conversation internally about your career of choice. And the reason that that starts to rise is, one, you've got a values decision. Two, you've got a decision around what you're going to spend your precious energy on. And three, it's natural that it's nourishing and energizing if you're in something that really aligns for you. Now, it's not that this might require a whole career change, particularly if you're in a profession where you're on your feet a lot of the time. You might then work out how you can transition those skills into another role or talk about what your options are. It doesn't have to be a huge leap, but the more you refine this internally, the more it will open up options externally. And that leads to a natural sense of expansion for you. It's like you're professionally developing yourself. And that in turn leads to this new biography, that this is the person you are with these incredible skills, with this incredible grit and tenacity. And this is the way that you want to work in the world that truly honors your professionalism and your body in a way that doesn't send it over the cliff, and you're out of the crash and burn process, which will send you straight back to being off-ramped. How do you work this out practically? One of the tools that you can use, if you will know what sends you into a crash, and you will probably have a lot of data about how you drive yourself to it. If you come back one step before that and think about what was the professional boundary or the intervention you might have done with yourself one step before you went over the cliff. And that might be, I didn't work till 2 in the morning. I might have worked till 8, depending on your role. Or I might have shifted the medication, or I might have not become over responsible. Because what happens when we live with a chronic condition is we will often try to overcompensate at work, and it's the overcompensation that can send us over the cliff. So if you come one step back, so that you know what was the decision that sort of tipped you over, and then you work backwards one step from that. And as you work backwards, you will find a point where it's sustainable and you get the work done, but it doesn't have all that pushing through, driving your body out of anxiety until it burns out. But actually, you start to navigate what is the way this could be done slightly differently before I then activate my default position, which is use every ounce of energy until I have nothing left, and then my body makes the decision. So these are just tips and tricks that I'm sharing with you to think about it. Not everything will be appropriate for you. Take what works. If one or two things work, take that to think about it and work through it. And we will talk about 3 sort of questions you can ask. What helps here? And what's important to me? And you can also start to ask, what am I going to release? What am I going to let off the plate? And so now in this conversation, I would love to invite Kimberly to have just a mini chat and your reflection, Kimberly, about, as I've talked through things, whether or not there's anything that resonated with you in your experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to remind people that you can type questions in the Q&A, and on the other side of this chat, we'll get to as many of those questions as we can. I would say, Most of it resonates in hindsight. I got diagnosed in the fall of 2007. And if you remember the timeline, I was working in financial services then, and that was not a great time to be working in financial services, much less working in financial services with a newly diagnosed autoimmune disease. And I really wish I would have had this wonderful framework and had access to this discussion about capacity, because basically I gutted it out for the first 2 years. I would think about dropping back to part-time and I never did. You talked about going over the cliff. That was me at the end of the day every day. And I would come home and make cereal for dinner and then do it all again the next day. And so interestingly, I ended up having a kind of a forced off ramp because 2 years after my diagnosis, I got laid off.
Mm. And
But
as
oh, go ahead.
no, you're right. Please keep
Oh,
going.
I was just going to say I did do some test and redesign in my personal life. I was a member of a volunteer alumni board for my alma mater. It was a great cause. We raised scholarship funds for high school kids to get to go to the school. But it was a lot of time, and you talked about things that were emotionally draining. It was very, very emotionally draining. And I had a 6 year board term, and 3 years into it, when I got this diagnosis, I just had to say, you know what, I cannot do this anymore. And I felt terrible like leading up to that decision. But then once I put in my resignation, it was just like, oh my gosh, this horrible weight is lifted. And, I was still, having to deal with the professional issues, but just having that one personal thing off my plate was a huge relief.
And I think what you're sharing there is that you can use the map as well for all sorts of situations. I've certainly used it socially. I've certainly used the circle of wellness socially. What's my baseline capacity? And then if I have more on the day, what does that look like? And I'm curious, Kimberly, as you then on-ramped into work, did you do volunteer? How did that look like when you were starting to come back then?
Um, so interestingly, I'd kind of seen the writing on the wall. I was very interested in the nonprofit sector. I had volunteered with the Charitable Contributions Committee at the organization I'd worked at. In the meantime, I had gone to conferences for the Graves' Disease and Thyroid Foundation, and kind of had in the back of my mind, wow, I'd like to start a support group, but there was no way that was going to happen with work. And so with the forced off ramp, that actually gave me the opportunity to go through leadership training to start a support group with our founder, Nancy Hord Patterson. And then I ended up starting a support group in Arizona, did an event here that brought in some presenters to talk about Graves' disease and thyroid eye disease. And so this was 2010. And then later that year, I ended up doing some contract work for the foundation, and it eventually turned into a full-time job.
Which also shows the beauty of how you didn't know that when you were looking at on-ramping back. You had no idea what your capacity might be or what the pathway might be. But I feel like you're also sharing there was a values conversation internally with yourself as well about not just what your capacity is, but where you wanted to spend your time in things that most resonated for you. Is that right, Kimberly?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I'll also mention that I had a period of test and redesign in this position. It was interesting to hear you talking about, well, we expect to just go back to full capacity in the new job. And, I was answering emails all hours of the day. I had done remote work, but 1 day a week. And so this was full-time remote work. I had materials covering every surface in my house. I had envelopes, I had brochures, I had labels. And I really had to learn to try to develop some structure around my hours. And I went through a big project to remove all of the materials and put them in one room in the house, so they weren't everywhere. But yeah, certainly went through some test and redesign.
Gorgeous. Thank you so much, Kimberly. JB, maybe we should open for questions now.
Yes, absolutely. And we do have some questions, so I'll get us started here. Um, One of the first questions we have is somebody who's actually already had their thyroid removed. And the question is kind of like, does this apply to having a chronic illness? This person says, despite the fact that they've had their thyroid removed, they're still having a problem dealing with trying to get back to work. And I think maybe this speaks to the chronic nature of even once you have your thyroid removed, you still need thyroid replacement. But I'll let both of you answer this question before we go on to the next one.
Thanks, JB. Look, absolutely use the map. If you've got anything that's affecting your physical health, then absolutely the map applies. It is not a criteria for you have to have a certain condition. And while I'm delighted that we're sharing it all with you, this map is used for many, many conditions. And so what you're doing is you're in the new as well as looking to on ramp because you're in a whole new experience. You're in new medication, you've got an identity shift that's happening in that process. And so do think about what your capacity looks like. And if it's super expanded, but it's not as full as you might have been previously, or it's more expanded than it was previously, start to think about what you can do and give yourself some of those clean tips so that you've got that conversation. If you feel that it's actually still significantly contracted, there might be side effects of the process or how you're going, then do work from what you can do there. What I can tell you is that over time, everybody's capacity shifts. So this isn't a one-time conversation with the mat. What my capacity was working under fluorescent lights in a really big building where I have to say, sadly, the floor vibrated as the lifts vibrated, like as the lifts came up. I could feel that because one of my conditions is a vertigo condition. That really, really contracted my capacity in that environment. But moving to a different floor in a different way, turning the, fluoro light off over the top of my head, more capacity. Physically, not much had changed. It actually was environmental, but I still had to flex between what my baseline was and what my optimal was, and then what the environment looks like to enable the optimal. So the final thing I want to say about this is some people have used this map that you might be at the other end of the working cycle and you might be transitioning out of work. There's still a sense of what am I going to do with my time? What do I want to contribute to or not? Even if you're traveling, what does that look like traveling? Test and redesign it. You're still working it out. So it's really a transitions map and it's all applied at this point into the career and chronic. I'm not sure, Kimberly, if there was another point you wanted to add to any of that.
Yeah, I would just add that particularly with thyroid removal, with thyroidectomy, with RAI, some doctors will throw around the term, cured. And it's more accurate to say that your hyperthyroidism is cured after you've had RAI, after you've had thyroid surgery. But you still do have Graves' disease. And so I think sometimes, there's this assumption that, oh, after I'm cured, I should be back at my 100% capacity. And that's definitely not the case for many of us.
Beautiful. Thank you. JB?
Yes, so we have another question. We have a participant who wants to know if there's any suggestions for someone who's still recuperating from brain surgery and who has Graves' disease. This person says they have an excellent education and experience as well, but they're very fatigued and they're noise sensitive as well. This person would very much like to work again as a forensic accountant, doing analysis and minimal oral communication, and would like to know how they could get started.
Great. So one of the things that I would do in that process is literally get lots of data from yourself about your capacity. At the moment, what you're looking at is the role first and then trying to work out how do I match into the role. I'm actually going to suggest you flip it. And the reason is not to give up the role, it's actually so that you start with what data you do have. So if you think about in that recovery, there'll be a recovery phase and then there might be a transition, and you may not know, even just personally, how that's going to go. But if you start to think, well, you know, talented, educated, read a lot, keep up to date with things. Are you watching webinars? Are there anything, activities you're doing that are just naturally part of what you would normally do? And then use that information to say, well, I am watching webinars, I can watch 40 minutes, or I'm not watching webinars, I'm reading reports or whatever it is. And give yourself an understanding of what skills you are currently using and what your capacity is, just naturally at this point in time, will give you then an idea of what skills you might be able to work into in the role. But also start to map, is it mornings, is it afternoons? Am I watching things, reading things, whatever? Have I socialized before that or after? Does that make a difference interacting with people? With the noise sensitivity is a huge thing that I have to manage with my conditions. And so there's lots of things that I've found personally that help. And one of the biggest things that help me may or may not help you, but just to give you something to start to think about, is Apple's AirPod Pros with noise cancelling. Made an enormous difference to me in all environments, but particularly in any working corporate environment. I would wear them all the time. And as I said, there were certain ways in which I worked out the lighting for me. Uh, but that made a big difference to what my capacity was. So those are a couple of thoughts I have. Kimberly, were there any thoughts you had at all?
I would just add, like maybe for that particular profession, can you do contract work? Can you do telework? Because then that maybe opens up some, or maybe adds some tools in the toolbox in terms of creating that environment that's good for you. If you can, maybe you can only do 4 hours a day. Maybe if you can work from home, if you take a break over lunch, that can refresh your capacity. As opposed to, jumping into one of the large accounting firms where you're expected to work 100 hours a week. And, that is obviously probably not the best environment.
Beautiful. JB?
Yes, I think this next question may be more suited toward Kimberly. We do have someone who's saying, what Graves' symptoms may remain after radiation?
Yeah, it's very individual. And what I always tell people, when we talk about, having thyroidectomy or RAI or being on anti-thyroid drugs, there are people that get treated with those things and then they go on with their lives. And they're not on the internet going, yay, I feel great on methimazole, or I had RAI, woohoo. I'm doing fabulous. The people that engage with our organization are the ones that are still struggling a little bit after that treatment. And so, I wouldn't say that that's everybody. But for the people that I've had contact with, I would say, fatigue is a huge one, across the board, regardless of the treatment option that you've chosen. Just concentration, sometimes brain fog can be a challenge. And particularly with RAI post-treatment, it can be challenging to get your levels normalized, because after you have that treatment, your doctor's making their best guess as to what dose of replacement hormone you should be on, and then there's some fine tuning.
Thank you so much for that, Kimberly. The next question is, can you get work accommodations because of thyroid disorders?
So, Kimberly, that might be where we talk about the resources and what people need to check through. What I can tell you is that different people have been able to get different accommodations, and certainly it's worth looking at the legislation in the US. Do you have any recommendations, Kimberly?
So yeah, and thank you for bringing that up because when we post this webinar online, I will include some links to some of those resources. But one of the organizations that I like a lot is the Job Accommodation Network. The acronym is Ask Jan, and they have excellent suggestions for accommodations. And it's so when we talk about the Americans with Disabilities Act, it affects a little bit larger employers. I think it's, and again, we're not experts. I think it's 15 or more employees, but it is if you have a condition that significantly impacts a major area of your life. So thyroid patients absolutely have been able to get accommodations through the Americans with Disabilities Act. And I will post the link for the Job Accommodation Network and also some general information about the ADA.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you. So I have another interesting question here that has to do with disclosure. This is a person who is starting a part-time job. They believe it could be challenging because they're actually going to be living in the home of their employer. And they think it's important to have some sort of self-disclosure, but they don't want to have to disclose everything. So what kind of advice might you have, Michelle, for somebody in terms of disclosing information about a chronic condition that may impact work?
Yes, so one of the things about this process is the cleaner and clearer you are, the easier it will be to share. And your medical information is your medical information. And we are often socialized to like through relationship, we share things. It's part of an intimacy building, but it's also part of saying like we're in the same team. However, I always simply shared with people that I had an autoimmune condition that was managed through medical professional treatment. That's it. That's all I ever shared. Because what happens sometimes if you share more, people ask you, have you tried yoga? Have you drank this sort of process? Have you done this? And people get over involved. Then once I shared that, I have an autoimmune condition that's managed through medical treatment, end of conversation. Then I would say, this is what I can do with it. And I'm always following medical advice around it. So if there's any shift in what I can do or whatever, I'll let you know. But I've been stable for the last 5 years, 3 years. Feel into what it is you want to share, because sometimes there's part of us which wants to make connection through the sharing, but that sets up then that we have to share more for there to be more connection. And the more clean you are in your own emotional energy, that this is just part of your experience, but it's not all of you, and you're here to do all of the work in the home, or work from their location, then that's actually what the focus of the energy is. Did you have anything else additional, Kimberly, at all?
Yeah, I would just add that it's so individual. We did, gosh, it's been about 7 years ago now. We polled our Facebook community on some different issues, and one of the things we asked about was, in your work environment, how do you deal with your coworkers? Are you very, very open about your diagnosis? Do you keep it close to your vest? Only tell a few people? And I was really surprised. Well over 50%, close to 60% of the people said, I'm very open about it. I'll talk to anybody about it.
Yeah.
And when I was working in financial services, I played it very close to the vest. I told, a small number of people that I had a, thyroid issue. So I thought that was interesting that so many people were just being very, very open about their condition and, maybe having some of those capacity discussions that I wish I would have had way back when.
Yes, and I think that you're absolutely right. Different environments, different things. The home environment creates an intimacy as well already. So definitely feel through whatever you start with is how it might continue. So just feel that connection for what feels good for you. Any other questions, JB?
Yes, we have one more, and this will be our final question for the session. And it's a perfect follow-on to the last question that we just asked, and that is Once you have shared or disclosed to your employer, if you start to receive backlash, how should you proceed?
So, really important question and perfectly on time. The backlash process, there is a lot of research around this, and you can definitely feel either that it's stigmatized or that your career pathways have suddenly become limited, or there might be some micromanaging in the process. One of the things to do, that's where those really healthy professional boundaries come in. And there's really only so much we can talk about in this introduction to the process. But one of the things that can help in that phase is to really look for neutral ground. And I'm going to talk about how to do this with your body first. Because what happens as that's coming towards you, it has a whole like energy of mental or emotional pressure that's also coming from the other person. You are reading what is not being said as much as what is being said. So that can make you either really try and puff up your energy, which takes a tremendous amount of your capacity, or also feel like you need to shrink down in response to it. Here's the first embodiment piece that can help. Send your awareness to your feet. If you literally, in any meeting, in any time, just send your awareness down and feel your feet, it will give you a sense of being grounded before you respond. Without going into all the details about what backlash might be or what it might look like, there are a couple of avenues you can go. One, keep it that you are following medical advice. You're not making it up. You're following medical advice. You have a condition that is actually clinically recognized, has a clinical treatment path, may have taken a long time to get diagnosed, and you may be testing and redesigning, but you have a medical condition. And so all of your framing is that you are following medical advice, and this is what you're navigating, but this is what your capacity is, and this is your skills, and this is how you're using it. It can be very competitive in particularly corporate culture at different times. So do stay focused on your skills and your impact. And with that impact, what is the most easy way? Don't need to tell anybody. What is the most easeful way for you to achieve that impact and work through it that way? It's not pleasant. It's not going to solve anything. But I can tell you, the more grounded you are, the less they're feeding off you sort of puffing up or shrinking, which starts to run the whole dynamic over and over. Kimberly, did you have any additional thoughts in that at all?
Oh, no, I was actually, we had one more question come in. Um, oh, and the person said that they had shared the Ask Jan tips with their coworkers and just, tense situations potentially causing panic. So that might be where we go back to, what you said and just center and focus on being grounded and then move forward from that. Easier said than done, of course.
It is easier said than done, but just remember that you don't have to always respond in real time. You can take your time to settle yourself before responding. So JB, I think that brings us to the next phase together.
Yes, thank you so much for all of the engagement. If you could just move to the next slide, perfect. So to follow up, there will be a resource that is available to you to help you work through the different stages of the map that you learned about today. Kimberly, I believe you'll be sharing this with the follow-up email and probably posting it somewhere as well. And if you'll go to the next slide, I just wanted to remind folks that they can also connect with Michelle and her website at Career and Chronic for additional resources. And then finally, as I mentioned before, your feedback is really, really important to us. We want to make sure that we're constantly improving the programs and the content. And we also want to make sure that when we meet with our leadership at the end of the year to tell them all that we've accomplished through AIM, that we have the data to show them how important these programs are to the community. So we would greatly appreciate it if you would just take a moment to scan the QR code and take our 5-question survey. And I'd like to again thank Kimberly Doris and the GDATF for hosting this webinar, and a special thanks to Michelle Irving as well for being our expert today and being so responsive to all the questions and providing all of the education to empower folks who are looking to take their career in the direction that they would like to see it go in. So thank you so much. And we hope that everybody has a wonderful afternoon or evening, depending on what part of the world you're in.